Hi, hi, I'm Duncan Barry. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Socialist History Society. So, welcome to everybody joining our session this evening. Um, we have very pleased to have Kevin McDonnell and Max Farrar speaking about Big Flame, a revolutionary organisation from the 70s and 80s. Many of us are veterans of various organisations. No doubt people here were involved in Big Flame, as well as Kevin and Max, and may not have seen them for decades or so. While Kevin and Max are speaking, because we have a slideshow as well, can people mute themselves if they haven't already, and save their questions for after the speakers? Please don't fill up the chat box too soon, because that is kind of distracting for the speakers. But we'll pick up comments in the chat after the speakers have finished. So welcome everybody. Over to Kevin.
Hello, can I have the first slide, please? Okay, the background to our talk is this book, that was published at the end of 24. It came out of a reunion of former members of Big Flame, which did two things. It decided to set up a website which has got a lot of documents, a comprehensive set of documents of Big Flame and this book. It took us 15 years to produce it, on and off, mostly off during that time. And it's Max and myself, the two authors of the book, but lots of other former Big Flame members contribute. About half a dozen wrote extended sections, and about another 40 others contributed memories. I want to cover four things in this talk. First of all, I want to give a little bit of background of the period in which Big Flame existed. I want to say what was distinctive about Big Flame. I want to say something about why Big Flame came to an end. And then finally, some of the things I think are of value for today. So moving on, next slide. I think why it's worth looking at a bit of background is Big Flame was very much an organisation of its time. And I mean, you'll all be familiar with some of the important kind of workplace struggles of the 70s. It was a period of intense struggles, such as the selection shown. Next slide. I think the other thing that was distinctive about the 70s is an upsurge of community struggles. There have been rent strikes and struggles against development before, but there was a significant upsurge, I think largely due to ex-students moving into the inner city and getting involved in things, in squatting, particularly alternative institutions, alternative papers, printing presses, nurseries, daycare, etc. And obviously the kind of claimants union is an important part of it. Next slide. Big Flame took its inspiration from several places abroad, and it's interesting that the three pamphlets it published in its lifetime, we were very big on publishing pamphlets, were of these kind of three countries. Italy, I'll say more about Italy later, but obviously Italy, there was an intense period of intense struggle, longer than May 68 in France. What is called the Creeping May, recovered for about sort of 4 or 5 years, with a big upsurge around the hot autumn of 1969. And I'll come on later to some of the things that Big Flame took from Italy. The other two pamphlets on Chile, obviously the period of the UP government, and Portugal, the period of the post-Carnation Revolution. I think the main thing that Big Flame took from them was the idea of kind of popular power. And in a kind of pre-revolutionary situation, form of co-ops and various forms of involvement. And I think Big Flame saw that as very important in the path towards socialism. We did also wanted to involved in various international struggles, anti-apartheid, and particularly obviously the struggle around Ireland. Big Flame was involved in the Troops Out movement. Next slide. Yeah, the name Big Flame came from a Wednesday play in 1969, written by Jim Allen and directed by Jim Loach. It's interesting. I think the name actually been around a bit before. Ken Loach, I should have said. That's what I was struggling. The name had been around before. Even there was once a newspaper which said it was a spark leading to a kind of a big flame later. And when in 1970, a group of people in Liverpool, independents and various political organisations got together to form a community newspaper, they chose that as its name. It produced about 7 issues, and then it folded mainly because I think that some of the principal movers found it a bit frustrating not being able to agree on definite line on lots of things, and they went off and formed their own political organisation. So from 1971, the Big Flame existed as an organisation. A couple of things to say at the start about Flickr. It was all very small, no more than a 100 to 200, though I think its influence was wider. It ran, I say, from what we've seen here, 71 to 84 when it kind of finally folded. Let's move on to that next slide. And so this is to talk about some of the influences on Big Flame and a particular influence on Italian Marxism. I think it's important to say that even in its earlier period, some people in the organisation were resistant to some of the ideas come this direction, and things did change over the years with some of the people who had been most influenced changing their views, and lots of people joining who weren't familiar with it. I think that's the other thing to say. This is operaismo, workerism, which is not a very good translation because it's got different meanings in English. And that was in the 1960s, a theoretical currents that published in these two journals shown there. And those are three of the kind of principal writers. I think it was distinct from autonomism, which came later and some people carried on with. I think some of the things that Big Flame took from operaismo was seeing the centrality of the working class, not always talking about capitalism doing things, but seeing a key driving force was a struggle of kind of workers. And they were very much into the idea of changes in the workplace, changes in the production line, changes taking place in the car factories and kind of Fiat, etc., and creation of a kind of massed worker. Next slide. And kind of growing out of those kind of struggles in that period in Italy, there was an organisation called Lotta Continua, The Struggle Continues, which Big Flame had links with and was influenced by. Some of the things that it took, though it kind of backtracked on them, was there was a lot of suspicion in Italy of the equivalent of shop stewards, delegates. Big Flame, an extent went on that in the early days, but later modified its position. And also, Lotta Continua was a much larger organisation than kind of Big Flame, had this idea of kind of militants, external militants attaching themselves to struggle, working the workers, helping produce bulletins, writing them overnight with workers and distributing on the factory the next day before. And that was to a certain extent taken up by Big Flame, but we were much smaller, and that it really did lots of people to generate that kind of involvement. Next slide. Libertarianism, obviously, the way these days libertarianism is associated with right-wing libertarianism, and people tend to forget about libertarianism of the 70s, which was distinct from anarchism. It was very much orientated, I suppose, distinct from anarchism. It was largely Marxist. That it was very suspicious of the state, very suspicious of co-option, involved in personal politics, community struggles. And there was something in the early 70s called the Libertarian Network newsletter, which kind of covers the 3 issues of that. Libertarian groups from around the country are part of that, and Big Flame was part of that a while. And lots of people who joined found Big Flame through that. Next slide. The other kind of big influence on Big Flame was feminism. And I think we were much more open to feminism than the other groups, which tended either to resist it and struggle with the women organisation, or hive it off to sector to kind of let them get on with it whilst it influencing the organisation as a whole. Next slide. Right, I now want to say some of the things that I think were distinctive about kind of Big Flame, and again a lot of sort of pictures of publications of which produced a lot. And I think There's often been a dynamic pulling in different ways between workplace and community struggles. And I guess at the time, 70s, 80s, a lot of people prioritised workplace struggles. These days, perhaps prioritise community struggles. But Big Flame thought both were important and but got involved with both. And you can see down the bottom a pamphlet on the Tower Hill in Kirby, kind of rent strike against the Financing Finance Act in the early 70s. And also it's very involved around Ford, particularly initially around the Harewood plant near Liverpool. Next slide. I think Big Flame kind of sync with other groups, obviously not necessarily people outside groups, independent, thought class was important, wanted to straighten the importance of class, but also other forms of oppression, the oppression of women and black people in particular. That I guess this is these days you'd call this kind of intersectionality, and I think Big Flame, for its time, what was very progressive on this front. Next slide. Yeah, the other thing that I think is distinctive about Big Flame's politics is this idea of mass politics, which can be a bit nebulous. But I guess what this is about is where it saw other organisations aiming at representatives of the working class, trying to get themselves elected as shop stewards, trying to get bodies to pass resolutions. Big Flame wanted to aim itself directly at as many as people as possible. And what we got there, probably not that visible, a series of cartoons from our cartoonists that published a lot in Big Flame, kind of representing that idea. I guess it was all about being not manipulative, not saying we're the organisation who's got the answer, we're taking the truth to you, but about trying, learning from people in struggles, supporting struggles. Next slide. I guess the other thing that was interesting about Big Flame is I think it was very democratic. Obviously, easier of an organisation of 100 people to democratic than the larger organisation. But, you know, it was very open to everyone being able to express their views in the bulletin. Everyone's able to attend conference. And the thing that's probably totally unreadable on the top right-hand side is an appendix of the book. And hopefully it will show is there were 5 periods when we had an elected national committee. And this these are the sort of 50 odd people that served on it. And what it really shows is no one goes right across the page. Everyone is just, most people just served 1 or 2 spells. And very, very few people served more than that. I guess the other thing about Big Flame was it thought politics needed to be enjoyable. And particularly the thing that people highlight, the members of Big Flame, was a summer school, which was a fun event as well as a kind of learning event. I think that's the final slide. And so what I want to say now is a bit about why Big Flame came to an end in 84. I think Big Flame, as you'll judge by what I've said so far, was an organisation that relied on struggles taking place, and the downturns and defeats under Thatcherism affected actually not Big Flame but other kind of groups on the left. Another thing, I think Big Flame's ethos was very much putting the movement before its own organisation, and therefore it became a priority for lots of people to carry on with their local campaigns, local kind of national campaigns they were involved with, and people went off and did that. I think another thing was that groups have a natural lifespan of 10, 15 years, and by then people tend to be worn out, often have children, new responsibilities, move off the dole and get jobs. And that affected Big Flame. And finally, as a point we make more fully in the book, Big Flame was pulled in different directions between the people who valued that initial Italian Marxism and others who were searching for new directions. I think that was for very many years a creative tension that, contributed on and made the organisation what it was. But I think after a while that grew stale and the arguments were repeated, and some people gave up and joined the Labour Party, and while those were only a minority, they were some of the people who were most committed to Big Flame's a national organisation. So what do I think is the value about Big Flame? I think what's valuable is much more, I say, its way of working, how it behaved in struggles, that mass politics I described, and its internal organisation, attempts at democracy. I think less because it had any original strategic ideas about how we're going to overthrow capitalism. I think Big Flame on that kind of level pulled in lots of different directions. So I know Max will touch on your party and that those sort of current debates and what he says. I think there's no point saying what would Big Flame do, because what Big Flame pulled in lots of directions. In the immediate kind of Big Flame period, people went off in all sorts of directions, joined the Labour Party, joined other revolutionary left groups, just concentrated on their local struggles. And I think that though they did do that, that quite most people that we've been in contact took the Big Flame politics with them. So finally, I think the situation's very different today. There's been decades of neoliberalism. The right-wing populism has may emerge as a counter-attraction to the people we want to attract. Big Flame only really talked about reformism as the alternative ideology. I think when we started writing this book 10, 15 years ago, we accepted that on the equalities front, there'd been significant changes in most countries. And obviously, we're in a position where that's being ridden back with toxic masculinity, open kind of racism. So, and I think also, I think Big Flame kind of hinted at, but never got its head round totally. And it's got worse because socialist ideas seem more distant and out of date these days. How people changed. I think that there's a fault of the left is people think we just present people with the facts and they'll come over to our side because our facts will defeat counterfacts. And I think a lot of the discussion about how ideas are formed, people see things through certain frameworks and their values. And I think the left kind of needs to address that when it's trying to get its idea across. So very finally, why I think Big Flame has value today. We've had some long conversations with a lot of younger kind of militants who seem to be going through a lot of similar debates to ourselves. So I think why we wrote the book and we are hoping to get across to younger people is that, Big Flame addressed a lot of those questions in the past. We got some things right, some things wrong. We sometimes had more questions than answers, but I think it is, even though it is 40 or 50 years ago, an experience worth looking at. That's my bit. I don't know if anyone else can't hear Duncan, but I can't hear Duncan. Ah.
Sorry about that. Thank you very much. I was just going to say, Max was still muting. Okay, over to Max now, and if people can keep their questions back till Max has finished. Over to you, Max. And you need to unmute. Yeah, okay.
I have power over that, do I? Good. Okay. Thank you, Duncan. Thanks very much to the Society for inviting us. I think actually we inveigled our way in, but thanks for having us. I've seen my friend from yesteryear, Tony, Jan Savage from yesteryear. Lovely to see you here. Well, here you're here, Jan, and a new friend, Ariel. So some friendly faces here, and I guess the older lags among us will probably be a bit less chippy than we were back in the day. So I obviously I agree with everything that Kevin said. I'm going to just show you a few slides just to kind of show you what some of us look like, really. And the part of the reason for doing that is to remind us that Big Flame, like almost all of the revolutionary left anyway, was incredibly young. And I know this does get said from time to time, but the more I think about it, the more I think that just the fact that we were so young, we were forming our politics in such an optimistic period when certainly the second slide, actually, if if you could go on, Steve, thanks. Certainly in somewhere like Liverpool, there was such a lot of reason to think that working class people could really shift society in the direction that we all wanted to go in. And I think a combination of our youthfulness and this optimism in British politics and European politics, and particularly, of course, the liberation movements in the developing countries, and the civil rights movement and the feminist movement erupting in America, I think had a huge influence upon us. So here are some of the youngsters. Next slide, please. This is sort of really just to sort of put one of Kevin's points in at the end, just kind of as a list. I think Kevin's absolutely right to say that it is well worth thinking about politics in terms of its core beliefs, its core values of particular period, or the period of socialism in which we were formed, and those are probably the sort of the bullet points that we stood for, and the bottom three are to try and get at the ambiguities that Kevin was alluding to. Exactly where were we on the spectrum between sort of libertarianism and Leninism? And obviously the sort of joke that we did like to tell in those days was that the only party we'd join would be a dance party. And obviously I think we probably wouldn't put it quite like that now. But the bottom one is to sort of say that I think in many ways Big Flame was oscillating between those three positions of revolution, reform. I think the Trotskyist idea actually that we more or less adopted of transitional demands, I think indicate a sort of an accommodation to reformism and what I call now radical democracy. So those are the sort of core values, if you like. Next one, please. So again, some more people. The joke really there is that we met and we met and we met again. What seemed like a kind of a lifetime of demos and meetings. And I put our daughter in the frame here because, and she'll pop up again, because my partner and I, who were in Big Flame, and she eventually after 30 years succumbed to marrying me. But we were probably one of maybe two or three couples in this period. Rose was born in 1975, that had children, and obviously that was one of the many reasons why I like Big Flame's more kind of personal and prefigurative politics, because it really did try and embrace the idea that you could be a revolutionary and live in either a commune or some kind of family structure. Next one, please. This is just to repeat really what Kevin's saying. So let's jump forward to actually, I just wanted the one of the reasons for that picture of Brian and Jenny is Big Flame was very interested in kind of represent what's now called representation. So that's the Ford logo turned into a t-shirt, which we all thought was terribly funny. Next one, please. Yep, so there are some of the women again, just emphasizing how young they are. There's a baby bottom right of your screen. This is whenever it is 81, so there are a few more babies by now, but it was, as Kevin has emphasized, centrally committed to feminism. And as Kevin has also pointed out, this wasn't just a kind of an add-on. We were genuinely trying to create an organization which had feminism absolutely at its center. Next one, please. Inside neighborhoods, tenants, the community work that Kevin referred to was very important to us as well. That's outside the house that I lived in. One day in the late 70s, I saw these kids playing and I thought, that's the kind of thing we want to see. Next one. Summer school that Kevin's emphasized. On the right there, you'll see, and people, on the hard left, the hard revolutionary left, they all thought we were a bunch of kind of quirky anarcho, Maoist, hippie softies, and we were. and we sang songs on demos. And that's our second kid in a sling. Next one, please. Yeah, so this is, I'm going to take a little bit longer over this bit now because I'm using up my time rather rapidly. In relation, so we're sort of moving on to thinking about what we kind of might learn from Big Flame for today. And you see the early 70s. I think our sort of this optimistic period in the early 70s where we saw mass movements all around us, whether they were in neighborhoods, whether they were sort of unruly workers' struggles involving masses of workers not constrained by their trade union or the revolutionary parties or even the Communist Party. So there was the sense, of course, the feminist movement, the anti-racist movement, the troops out movement, all these social movements that were emerging as well. I think we had the confidence that those movements would, in some inchoate way, create the radical change that we were looking for. By about 1976, and that's the one which we produced what we referred to as a draft manifesto for a new revolutionary socialist organization. Quite a serious effort was made to sort of directly speak to all those movements and say, come on, let's see if we can't get together. And it was a pretty resounding failure. We did recruit some people, some disillusioned people from other parties, both from formerly people who are formerly Trotskyists and from people who are formerly anarchists. But we didn't get very far with uniting the movements. In 77, we joined in with the IMG, the International Marxist Groups. I bet let's hear a few shouts for the International Marxist Group. I bet some of them are here today. We responded to their call to try and produce a kind of a platform in by-elections, and if it was to appear a national election. So we signed up for an initiative called Socialist Unity, and we got a resounding no from the Socialist Workers' Party, and a resounding no from the working class. We got pitiful votes where we stood. So when Beyond the Fragments came along in 1979, which of course Lynn Siegel by this time was in Big Flame, and she contributed one of the important sections to that book. Sheila Rowbottom never joined, but she was very much in our milieu. And I can't remember if the photo went up before, but Hilary Wainwright would come to our summer schools and was, I can't remember whether she was in the IMG or some other organization earlier on. But so all three of the Beyond the Fragments people were very much in the sort of the big Flame family, if I could call it that. But I have to say that there were very few of us in Big Flame who thought that was really going to go very far, because we'd had this rather chastening experience in 76 and 77. So when the rumblings began for your party, I asked lots of people. We've done a few of these events recently, and it was very significant to me. And at each of the events that we've done in person in the past, I always put up a slide a bit like this slide, sort of to see if I could generate a discussion about your party. And literally never did anyone want to discuss your party. I mean, it just did not come up. And when I've had this conversation with all the Big Flame comrades that we're in touch with still, they are not touching your party either. So I'd be very interesting to see what the assembly here thinks of your party. Could we have the next slide, if that's okay? So here's just really schematically some of the things that I think if we were to try and carry these sort of basic ideas forward, the sorts of reframings that I think are needed. So everybody here has probably read Ralph Miliband's crucial book, Parliamentary Socialism, and that was probably the book that most of us who when about 20 people did leave Big Flame in 1981 to join the Labour Party, I think the rest of us had either read the Ralph Miliband book or had absorbed it one way or another, and we had no confidence at all that the Labour Party would, as the joiners thought it might do, shift ever more effectively to the left. And I think that's, I think it's even more. I joined briefly under Corbyn, so I sort of changed my mind in the Corbyn period for a while. But I'm back with Ralph Miliband that it's not a socialist party, never has been, never will be. But on the other hand, I'm not going to commit myself to any longer to revolution. And I think we should abandon that term, but we should keep talking about structural change. And in the Big Flame tradition, that structural change would be absolutely driven by and based in a variety of grassroots democratic egalitarian movements across the board. And this is to sort of reframe the Big Flame's position to some extent, but I think it would want to ally itself, deliberately ally itself to a party of the radical green left, which puts socialists into parliament. And as again Kevin was alluding to just before, I think we actually need to revisit the way in which we talk about socialism, and to be explicit about a revision of its practice, and this is a particular bugbear of mine, which the next slide will say a little bit more about, and actually explicitly speak about what I'm just polemically calling here new souls. Could we have the next slide? So this is structural change for fundamental. So therefore, we're talking about fundamental change. And as Kevin says, we just have to acknowledge that we are on we're serious. The socialist, the radical socialist left is very seriously on the back foot, and it does require some of these sorts of points that I'm coming up to now to be revisited and to be rethought. I'm sort of agnostic on the debate between whether it's class conflict or in the traditional Marxist way or left populism. I'm not sure whether that is such a serious debate, such a necessary debate as I would have said it was 20 years ago, say. But what I would emphasize is that we're in an absolutely daggers drawn conflict with capitalism as such. And then again, I'm not a proponent. I'm not this so-called identity politics is the reason why we've lost so much ground. I don't think is the case. I think we should understand that class is actually often an identity position for people. I think we should look at all those possible identity positions as equally valid bases for struggle. I think the battle actually is around what in academic frameworks anyway used to be called sort of essentialism versus anti-essentialism, and I do think that the left has to have an anti-essentialist position. The other thing that I think this is probably common now, but it's interesting that a leaflet I picked up for your party at a Gaza demonstration recently, their sort of this is the Leeds, your party anyway, their sort of 6 points didn't mention ecology or the climate crisis or in any shape or form. It just obviously seems to me, I say obviously, it might not be for everybody, but my sense is that a radical ecology is an absolutely essential part of what we've got to think about right now. And then just to say a little bit more on the next 2 points about a really sort of fundamental personal psychological change. I think, and Big Flame did try and work on this. We were proponents of what used to be called personal politics. I'm actually on a psychoanalyst's couch right now, and I've been revisiting a whole range of things about Freud and politics. And some of you will remember Marcuse and Erich Fromm and all those people back in the day who were trying to find a sort of merger. And it is rather interesting to see that what in Freudian in English is called the psyche, Bruno Bettelheim would actually translate better from the German as the soul. And of course, I'm thinking of the soul in the terms of soul music. I'm not thinking of the soul in the terms of going to church, but I do think that something, and this is the sensuous materialism point, I do think that we absolutely have to think as Marx did in the economic and philosophical manuscripts. It's absolutely throughout those early writings. Marx talks about us as sensuous human beings, rooted in our material situation, working to make society in a materialist kind of way. But what I think we need to reinsert is this idea that we are soulful, emotional human beings who are desperately struggling with at the moment perhaps a receding sense of hope, but desperately struggling for a massive structural change in society. So I think that final bullet point is sort of a kind of one sentence version of what I think we're now should be concentrating on. And I stick in there grassroots democracy, because I think we absolutely have to reconfigure, or not reconfigure, but re-emphasize what we mean by actual democracy as opposed to parliamentary democracy, and particularly in the light of so many countries openly and willingly embracing autocracy or authoritarianism or neo-fascism or whatever word you're going to use. I think we absolutely have to talk about freedom, democracy, and pleasure. And that's my 20 minutes. Oh, yeah, we're trying to sell this flipping book, and I can give it to you for 20, or I can get it sent to you for 24 quid if you want to email me.
Okay, thanks very much, Max. We've got lots of time for comments and questions. If you can put your hand up using the reaction button, that will be helpful. Otherwise, wave, but it may take me some time to see you. Right, Don Flynn first.
Thanks, Duncan. I didn't expect to be brought in so quickly. Yeah, I had an association with Big Flame right at the beginning. I was part of the group that produced the 7 issues of the newspaper style of it. And back in those days, I was a representative of the International Socialist Group. I mean, the newspaper was supposed to be a joint activity for several left-wing groups at the time, and one of which was IS, later to become Socialist Workers' Party. Then after that, in 1970, I came down to London to be a student and lost contact when it went into the phase of being an organised group. I remained in touch. I'd done my A-levels at Kirby College with Paul Thompson. So I was very much followed the developments of Big Flame, and coming back home on my visits to Liverpool, I'd attend meetings at that point. So remained in touch with those developments. But my feeling, I mean, based on that experience, what I came across, and also I thought it came across very much in reading the book, was the extent to which a Big Flame perspective depended on the view that the working class was inherently revolutionary, that even though it didn't necessarily think politically, but in terms of its cultural response to the conditions of its life, it was 100% opposed to capitalism. And that manifested itself in all sorts of different ways of resistance, street level pushing back against authority of one sort or another. And Big Flame absolutely insisted on that. And it led to a perspective on the trade unions and, I mean, social democratic forms of class organisation as being nothing else but completely reactionary. They were the obstacles, they were the barriers, they were the traitors, the people who sold out. And that was a position that basically fell apart. It fell apart first phase of that was 1979, when Thatcher got elected, and with 1/3 of the working class voting for the Conservative Party during that period, and subsequently a long period of defeat thereafter. And Big Flame didn't adjust to that at all. I think is demoralised, as a lot of other people, by the defeats of the 1970 post-79 period. But at the same time, what it didn't come to terms with was, without anybody spreading the illusion that Labour was a socialist party, what did happen was that something resembling a socialist current was developing within the Labour Party around Tony Benn. And not just Tony Benn, but left-wing shifts within the trade union movement, workers' occupation movements, workers' control movements of one sort or another, and which I think basically led to the schism within Big Flame that eventually took place when suddenly it decapitated itself, and the leadership of Big Flame, or 20-odd people from it, went over wholesale to the Labour Party, and some of whom committed themselves very deeply to the efforts to renew a radical social democratic tradition. So that's my view of it. I think it was more than burnout, which is a shame, because a lot of the organisations about the base, and my commitment to left libertarianism remains as strong as it ever did. But the problem was it overplayed its hand in terms of the revolutionary nature of a working class, and as a consequence of that, it never understood the developments that were taking place within the reformist parties. It was not able to adjust to the potential for radical moves developing within the Labour Party, and by the time that was a busted flush, by the mid after the miners' strike and thereafter, and the right wing of the Labour Party reasserted control, the movement for the potential for change had finished at that point, and Big Flame basically vanished into history.
Okay, thanks for that perspective, Don. Right, Kevin, Max, I'm sure one of you would want to respond to that before we go on to other comments or questions.
I'm happy to take other questions, other comments. I would like to come back. Basically, I agree with Don, but one or two slight modifications. But I'm happy.
Got anybody else with their hand up? Yeah. Okay, Nadine.
I'm going to say some of the same things as Don, but it's not surprising, because we were both in Labour Committee in Ireland, and we were also both in Islington. Now, I was never a member of Big Flame, but I do know quite a lot of the current of Big Flame, who was around in Seagull, because I was very active with some of them in anti-racist and anti-fascist stuff, and also then they came into the Labour Party. I think that Don's correct. There was a moment from about 79, from nearly 10 years, when there was, at least in some cities and in some parts of the Labour Party, what we call municipal socialism, which did actually help a lot of people. And you talked about intersectionality earlier on. Actually, a lot of that was based on working with black sections, ethnic minorities, the women's movement, which had come up, and Big Flame was, active in that, and the emerging gay rights movement. And I think that was very positive. I'm saying some different things also. Whether or not the English working class will ever be revolutionary, I've never thought it would be, but then I'm Irish, so that might colour my views. A lot of my work was around Ireland, as was Don's at that time. And I think there was a very different politics going on, particularly in Northern Ireland, at the same time we're talking about a much more community-based and sort of revolutionary politics was going on there for lots of different reasons. And I agree with Don that actually after the demise of GLC, although it did produce lots of good things and bring lots of people together, the 90s and 2000s were pretty dismal. And a few people like myself stayed in the Labour Party, but apart from in a few places like Islington North, the Labour Party was really not a great place to be, and it obviously has deteriorated even further. I'm interested, you raised your party. My views about your party, which I'm a member of, are mixed. A lot of people like myself and Lynn are active locally in your party because we think there are young people who remind ourselves of them, remind them of ourselves, and they are certainly trying to do something. They're having reading groups, they're having socials. I would say some of them are very naive, and I'm sure we were naive as well. But there is a resurgence, and in Islington at least, some of people like myself and a few other people are working with them. And they are actually quite good at working across the age, unlike some other political parties. And I'm sort of hopeful that some parts of your party, but your party may be dragged down by the fact that there's a whole current in there which really haven't got over being in trade union bureaucracies or in the Labour Party. So it's a very interesting point at the moment. And it could go one of two ways. There are people in the middle like myself who belong to something called Den Block who remind me of what we were like as Benites. And it's interesting because quite a lot of the young people in Den Block refer to themselves as Benites. They were far too young to ever been a Benite, but there is a kind of Benite current, international, want to involve all the different communities, like Black communities and women's units. So there is part of your party which could be quite useful, whether it's actually continues, or whether the present situation politically will defeat it. But I'm more hopeful. But I'd also say, I think, looking around the room, most of us are on the older side. And I think if you grew up in the 60s and 70s, we do retain a hope, which a lot of young people have not captured, because as far as they're concerned, things have just gone from worse and worse and worse. At least we remember times when it was good and we did feel we were actually doing something. But I think we have to hold on to that. Thanks.
Thanks, Nadine. Can't see anybody else with their hands up as yet. Kevin, did you want to respond?
More to John than Nadine, but if no one else is speaking, I just wanted to pick up the points he made. First of all, on the working class, I think there's some truth in what John said, that I think is understandable in the context of the 70s. But I do think it's useful corrective that the people who talk about things being done to the working class. So I think that this part of it is true, but obviously in some forms, and particularly sort of various autonomous writings today, is overblown and far too optimistic. I think on the trade unions, I think I disagree with Don. I don't think Big Flame was ever hostile to kind of trade unions. There was a period where some influential people in Big Flame were hostile to shop stewards based on the car industry. But that was always challenged by other people in Big Flame who worked in the health service and thought shop stewards played a vital role. I think if anyone looked at Big Flame's publication on workplace organising, organising to win, find it's definitely not anti-trade union. By then, it's seen for many people being shop steward as a useful option. Finally, on the Labour Party, I'm a strange person, fairly agnostic in feeling there's no one answer. I'm quite happy there's some people trying to push socialism, Labour Party and your party and elsewhere, and no party. I wish they wouldn't hate each other so much and fight and condemn each other. But I think there is no one clear answer where everyone should be, and I don't think there ever really was a moment in the late 70s with not just Big Flame people, but other people joining, where we could have transformed the Labour Party. I mean, even when the 20 or so people who joined, there was a minority position who probably didn't have much faith in things changing at a national level, but found it a useful forum for struggle. Instead of being a couple of people in the London borough, struggling by yourself, there's been an influx of other people with similar politics into the Labour Party. It was a basis for organising, and there were good things being done in local government and some of the kind of left councils. So there are opportunities there, but I don't think that not everyone who joined the Labour Party then thought are going to succeed in transforming it. So I'll leave it there.
Thanks. David Morgan, you're next. You need to unmute. Yeah.
Yeah,
David.
I was trying to put the visual thing on.
It's all right. We can do without the video.
You don't want to see me anyway. You don't. I was just going to say that I think I encountered Big Flame just back from picking up the publications in the Grassroots bookshop in Manchester. I mentioned that because I think Hilary Wainwright was involved with that cooperative bookshop. I saw her there a few times, and when I went to London in the early 80s, I got involved with a group called the Socialist Society, which was promoting some ideas very similar to Big Flame: radical democracy, prefigurative politics, feminism, a form of identity politics, and democratization of public service, and also municipal socialism. Hilary was working at the GLC at the time, and I think she'd worked on the Lucas aerospace plan for a kind of cooperative initiative for industry, and with Tony Benn later on. And one thing that came out of the Socialist Society was linking up with the Labour left, especially Tony Benn, who was, after he'd failed bid for the leadership of Labour, he became more interested in grassroots organisation, and he sponsored some big conferences called in Chesterfield, where he was the MP, and I think thousands of people attended those. And Ralph Miliband was a force as well in that, as well as Hilary Wainwright and some of the other people from the New Left. And that's what got me interested in in politics. I was a member of the Labour Party, but interesting. That's why I wanted to do this meeting, because I thought Big Flame was kind of like a pioneer of the Socialist Society, and some of the people you mentioned, Lynn Segal, obviously from Beyond the Fragments, working with Hilary, and some of the ideas of Socialist Society went into maybe they're still around in the organisation Your Party. I noticed, unfortunately, they've not really taken off. I noticed today in the debate on Mandelson, someone was putting out extracts from Tony Benn's diaries when he was warning people about Mandelson in the 1980s. And also, I noticed that one of the independent MPs, Adnan Hussein, who had a big fallout with Zara Sultana, is now sitting alongside Alicia Cairns and Sir Simon Hoare on the Conservative side of the opposition benches. I don't know if that's significant or just accidental, but he seemed to be quite comfortable sitting there this afternoon. It's the first time I'd noticed him seated there. So people do change their political alignments. But can you just say anything about the Socialist Society as such, if you know anything about it and how it related to Big Flame? Thank you for your contribution.
Thanks, David. For those that don't know, David is Secretary of the Socialist Society, so helped set up the meeting. Before we come back to Kevin or Max to respond to David's points, I'll take Ariella Lawson. Ariella.
Sorry. Did that work?
Yeah, we got you now.
Okay, good. I was just going to add, because I'm I guess, a fresher perspective on Big Flame, but I'm doing research on the 1970s and came across Big Flame, and also kind of, interested in this broader type of politics. And I think it resonates a lot with me. And I think people maybe in my generation of yeah, again, I don't know how much I can speak for everyone, but some of the things that I think, I guess for me, that was really interesting to think back to kind of this autonomous politics. It's like my generation, or yeah, I guess like going through Occupy was kind of formative early experiences. And I think people got kind of a taste of, this is the idea of direct democracy and stuff like that. But then I think there's a lot of contradictions that were raised also in that experience around like how do you connect or interact with like institutions? What about the state? Like, I think there's a lot of questions that and kind of tensions that emerge within that. And I guess I don't feel like enough people kind of maybe know more of this type of what I see as this type of perspective that's able to kind of like work in the contradictions. And I think that's something that actually stood out quite strongly from to me is like you don't try to like find like I guess this idea of starting from struggle is that you're working in the contradictions, like you're trying to transform something. And so it's not like one answer or the other answer. It's like you're going to change, capital is going to change in response, you're going to have to change again. And so this idea that it's like very strategic in how you're thinking about struggle and how you're thinking about how capital is changing in relationship to your struggle, I think is really valuable. And I feel like there's something to learn from in that kind of perspective. It's like, what can we, yeah, I guess maybe the question is like, you start from struggle. So where are the struggles happening right now? Like that's kind of where you would root your politics. So I think you can see that in a lot of different angles. And then I guess the other question is like, what is the enemy doing? What does that tell us about like a kind of relationality? And I'm coming from the US, so like seeing Trump and seeing whatever this is happening, it's like, okay, well, everyone knows neoliberalism isn't working anymore. That's been established. Like the right is also realizing that that's not working anymore. And obviously the strategy is then changing. So it's like, oh, now we have just full on fascism. But I guess in that question then is like, what's that a reaction to? And if you have Trump, if there's like an intensification of this kind of authoritarianism, then what's the threat that it's reacting to? And I think that's almost where I would find hope still is like, okay, well, that means that there's a threat on the other side that is maybe still there in some form. And so, yeah, I guess for me, that's like the kind of interesting perspective that I kind of get from reading Big Flame's some of the writing and pamphlets and thinking about the kind of different sites of struggle and the kind of like strategic positioning that yeah, I think there's like so much to learn from nowadays still from that perspective. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks. Nadine has just put a reference in the chat to the In and Against the State publication for the late 1970s, which I'd certainly recommend myself that you, Aria, others have a look at. Okay, Francis, you're next. Francis, although you're unmuted, we can't hear you. Still, we can't hear you, Francis. Sorry. Can you put your comments in chat and we'll come back to you later? Also, yes, Cynthia Coburn's The Local State book has also been referred to in the chat, which again, I would certainly recommend. Right. Can we go on to anybody else? Or Kevin and Max, do you want to respond to any points raised? A number of questions have been put to you.
Okay.
Kevin.
Yeah. On the Socialist Society, I guess it should be included. And one of the things that some people did after Big Pain fell apart in '84. I know, two or three people that were involved in it, and yes, there is some kind of overlap, but exactly what they did, I don't really know. I just want to pick up one other point from Ariella, and this idea of identifying where the struggles are and orientating yourself towards it. I guess that's what Big Flame did. When it, picking up on the idea of the mass worker in the car industry, in the wrong belief, I guess, that everything was going that direction. Not obviously, if you were doing interventions today, that wouldn't necessarily, wouldn't be your starting point. And I know groups that more recent origin, like Plan C, talk about how to intervene in the different forms of economy that exist today. And I guess that is very important, that people are thinking what changes have occurred in the economy and acting accordingly.
Hey, Max, did you want to say anything at this point?
I want to apologize to Don, which is we did, neither Kevin nor I were in Big Flame right at that. I didn't join until 75. And when we tried to kind of dig into the actual origins, we did get bits of help from people like Martin Yarnett and eventually Paul Thompson and the people who were there at the beginning, but they didn't tell us that Don was in that original group. So very sorry that you're not in the book. I've just checked, you're not in the index either, Don. So massive apologies for that.
Don and I both look, because Don once claimed to me that he actually came up with the name Big Flame, which was
well, there you are.
Yeah, it was a meeting in a pub, the old Red Line on London Road.
Oh.
I was chatting with Martin Yarnett and Steve Fernando and a guy called Jimmy Burns, who was a shop
Jimmy beat the hell out of me at the meeting in Liverpool recently. He told me I'd sold out. We were all a bunch of shit. It was terrible. Jimmy said,
my nose day.
in the book. I said, "You're in the book, Jimmy," and he said, "I don't want to be in your fucking book." It was a proper blast from the past.
Grumpy old man in that case. No, but we were talking about the potential name for this newspaper that we were about to launch, and I was like a 16, 17-year-old kid, very pimply, very fresh to all of this stuff. The one idea I had, because I'd been deeply impressed by the Ken Loach play, was, did anybody see that play of last summer? And Martin Yarnett looked at me very sagely and said, that's an interesting idea. And that was the end of the conversation. But then 3 months later, that was the name of the paper when it came out.
Well,
that was one lasting contribution to politics.
When popular demand insists that we do another book about Big Flame, I will definitely make sure that's in there.
Yeah, all right.
But the point that you're making about this idea that the working class was inherently revolutionary, I mean, I do think this was I think a lot of us did think that. And I think the people who thought that most were middle-class wankers like me. And I think eventually the people who began to sort of pull us back from that position were a combination of some of the middle-class people, but also people who, although they'd been to university, had a deeper connection to actual real lived working class experience. And that, as Kevin was saying, that position did get whittled away from the sort of 77, 78, 79 onwards for two reasons. Even people like me who lived in a multicultural inner city area where Black people were kicking off all the time, it was easy to convince yourself. And if you were working in car factories, it was easy I think it was easy for us to convince ourselves that there was this sort of mass current of people who were pushing, capitalism over. But even people like me who'd done half of my A level was in politics, I remember being staggered as a sixth form student to hear that, historically 20% of working class people have always voted conservative. So at the back of, I think, a lot of our minds was a kind of questioning of this faith. But this is partly also going back to the youthfulness of us. I think there was just there was a kind of youthful optimism that colored our perspective. And part of me is very glad glad to have had that experience, and it's wonderful to hear from Nadine that people in Islington and other parts of the country are joining your party with this in mind. And certainly, as we've taken this book around into various cities, in the last year or so, there's always been 10, 15 younger people, Ariel's age and a bit younger, who do see. I think they're not as naive and optimistic as we were, but they do see the point in thinking along these lines. And the reason for writing this book was simply to try and put it down on paper for younger generations now and generations to come, because we ourselves reach back into traditions within Marxism which have, of course, been systematically eroded. So the massive mistake of so many people being seduced by Althusser's idea that there was a radical break in Marx's writing from the early writing to the later writing, those sorts of ideas became so well embedded in the 70s that it was very hard to hang on to that much more open-minded kind of Marxism. And obviously Marx fought and Engels fought the bitter battle against the anarchists, but I've only just found out, reading that superb book about Eleanor Marx that came out recently, that both Eleanor and Frederick, they supported William Morris's party rather than the Social Democratic Federation. And obviously they wrote that fantastic book, which is, the foundations of socialist feminism. And I think, we've got a job to do, and these sorts of discussions are part of it. We've got a job to do to sort of tease out the best bits in our tradition. And then, and this is Ariel, so helpful for Ariel to remind us that you work these ideas out in political struggle. You don't just try and graft on 100 years old theory. You think about it, you bring it up to date as best as you can, and you test it out in practice.
Sorry, can I bring Toby in now, Max?
Yeah,
and you
I'll
can
shut up.
carry on a moment. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, but Toby has been waiting. Toby.
Okay. Can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Look, I don't know a great deal about Big Flame. I've come across various people over the years who have been members of it at some time or another. In terms of the paper, I just remember that in about 1974, I must have bought a few copies of it in Compendium Bookshop in Camden Town. And I had the sensation reading it, apart from obviously cottoning on that it was based in Liverpool, struggles in Liverpool, was that it seemed to be a Maoist organisation, or there were adverts in it, which seemed to be Maoist and possibly started. Look, I come really from a sort of Trotskyist background, and therefore I would have categorized them as sort of Stalinists of some sort. Whether there was actually Stalin and Mao being pushed in an adverts in the paper or whatever, but that's the only experience I have of actually reading copies of the paper about 50 years ago. But the thing that obviously interests me a bit as somebody who's worked on Italian things and the Italian left is the connection with Italy. But the question I would like to ask there, I am sympathetic, though I don't think it's necessarily relevant in the current conjuncture to what the original operaisti were doing in terms of looking at class struggles in the big factories of northern Italy. On the other hand, I'm completely hostile to what Negri came up with later in autonomism, which I think is still a baleful influence on the Italian far left even now. But what I was curious about in relation to Big Flame and the Italian connections was whether the Red Notes collective were actually came out of Big Flame members or not. I'm not clear. I mean, I know it ends up with Ed Emery acting as the primary translator of Tony Negri and an absolute Negri's fan until, Negri's death and beyond, doubtless. He's more of a fan before Michael Hart was. But I mean, were those people, did they come out of Big Flame, the Red Notes Collective, from which then leads to Ed Emery and translating Negri? In terms of your party, I mean, this is possibly a bit of a irrelevance in terms of the book, but in terms of your party, which I'm not clear whether I ever was accepted as a verified member, I mean, particularly since there's all this stuff about no dual membership, and I am a member of the Alliance for Green Socialism and proud of it, and have been for 23 years or something. It seems to me that sadly, I think, because I liked him in many ways as Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and I feel that he was traumatised by the whole experience of being expelled and all the rest of it from the Labour Party. But I mean, he has ruined your party, or at least he's allowed Carrie Murphy to ruin it. As sort of authoritarian and not in the, maybe Zara can save it. I mean, I'm not saying she's an angel, but I'm saying that she seems to be more inclined to something constructive and democratic rather than the sort of bureaucratic legacy that you've got, which is presumably Carrie Murphy, the influence of her partner, Len McCluskey, as a completely corrupt trade union leader, discredited in the ranks of Unite militants now. But I mean, they're destroying your party in my view. I don't know whether it can be saved. I mean, I was very hopeful that considering that the Labour Party under Starmer's worse than it was under Blair, your party might have, and it had 800,000 people interested in it. And now it's down to about 20,000 members, as far as I understand.
Okay, Toby, I think you've made your point.
Okay.
Do either Kevin or Max want to respond on either part of that question? The links with Italian Marxism and then your party point.
On the Ed Emery and Red Notes, I mean, always got the impression that Red Notes was just Ed. I think there was some sort of tentative connection with John Merrington and translating stuff at the early stage. And Ed Emery was in East London Big Flame at a stage where Big Flame consisted of autonomous groups, as Liverpool Group, Manchester Group, and two in London. And they decided they didn't want to be part of a national organisation in 74. And I think Ed carried on the fringes of Big Flame. So he left along, well, he didn't join, let's say, along with everyone else from East London. But he carried on a sort of contact on the fringes of Big Flame. On Maoism, I think Big Flame was probably more optimistic on China than it should have been. It did put China in a different camp of some possibility of working towards socialism when it was strongly kind of condemned the Soviet Union and associated countries. But that did change, I think, fairly late in the day, post the death of Mao, and way things kind of moved, where it put China in the same camp as or, to some extent kind of worse than the other countries. So, but I don't think you could ever really fairly describe Big Flame as kind of Maoist. I mean, I know of kind of one person who was in a Marxist-Leninist background that joined Big Flame. So that's one thing. If you look at the kind of various politics, it's hard to identify anything that you'd call as kind of Maoist, apart from you can possibly talk about mass line and mass politics, some sort of overlap there. But really on identifying how progressive China was, it did get it wrong for a long period of time.
Okay, Kevin, did you want to add anything?
No, that Kevin and I are two different people. And Kevin I agree with him completely.
Sorry. I was getting the two of you muddled up. So apologies, Max. Okay. I wasn't sure which one you jumped in first then. Any other comments or anybody who hasn't commented yet? Last chance for contributions. Okay. Any final comments, Kevin or Max?
Well, I'd just really like to say thank you for the event and for the contributions. And I'm very interested in what Nadine said about elements within your party having some sort of inspiration value. And I tried to go to a Your Party meeting in Leeds, but they advertised the wrong venue, so that wasn't a very good start. And so I've never met anybody yet from the Leeds Your Party, but I will. What she said has made me think I better have another look. But yeah, so just thanks for having us.
Okay, Kevin, anything else?
No, nothing to add.
Okay, thanks very much to both of you. Thanks to everybody for attending. For those of you that aren't members of the Socialist History Society, do join. You get copies of our biannual journal, Socialist History, published by Francis King, or edited by Francis King that spoke earlier. You also get a couple of occasional publications a year. There's a couple we're working on at the moment, and an occasional newsletter. Our next online session is on the 24th of February with Professor Lyndall Roper, who will be speaking on her new book, Summer of Fire and Blood, on the Germans' Peasant War of 1524 to 26. Any ideas of what we could cover, speakers or articles for the newsletter, or other interested in other publications of ours, do get in touch with us. All the details of how to contact us are on the Socialist History Society website. So thanks to you all, and hope to see some of you at a future meeting. Thank you and good night.